Welcome back to Tailgate Discussions. My name is Dakota. That's Alex Twist. And Alex, I'm going to hand it over to you to start us off this week. I didn't have a lot of time to prepare some notes, so go ahead.
Don't worry about it. We've been gone for was like a couple of weeks now, so wanted to recap what's been happening in the college football world. Starting with the SEC, I wanted to shout out Tennessee with their big win over Oklahoma. Um, I think they got to be the dark horse to win the SEC right now, along with maybe Ole Miss. But that team looks really, really dangerous, and I don't think they're anything to play around with right now. And in the Big Ten, Michigan somehow beat USC in the Big House. It was a really impressive showing by their defense, but the new QB that they have, Alex Orji, struggled mightily. He went 7 for 12 with just 32 passing yards, no touchdowns, but they somehow won that game still. And USC made a late second half surge. They even had the lead at one point in the fourth quarter, but they just couldn't stop the run all game. And it's very problematic for Lincoln Riley's defense. It's like a common theme for him every season. They just lack physicality in the trenches, and they kind of get beat up, and that's going to be kind of a problem for Lincoln Riley, especially in the Big Ten. The Big 12 has been the most chaotic conference of all of them. There's so many evenly matched teams. Like, if you just take a look at the standings right now, it's really hard to actually have a clear favorite in that conference. Utah would have been my clear favorite, but they lost Cam Rising. Regardless of that, Utah pulled out a really gutsy win against Oklahoma State on the road in their first game without Rising. So I'm still pretty high on them, but BYU, who sits at the very top of the Big 12, got a big-time win on the road against Kansas State. But the most notable game that needs to be mentioned is what Colorado did against Baylor. I don't think we've ever seen two players carry a football team like Shador Sanders and Travis Hunter have, at least not in quite some time. And I don't think it's going to last for a whole season, just like last year. But they're always one of my favorite teams to watch week in and week out. They're gonna do something funny or exciting one way or another. And in the ACC, FSU's just fallen off a cliff. I expected them to regress a decent amount this season when we were doing the preseason top 25, but I still had them in my top 25. Although I didn't really want to put them there, but I thought it would be not very objective to keep a team that was undefeated last season out of the top 25, but they deserve to not be there. They
Yeah, and
barely
we'll,
beat California. Go ahead.
and we'll get into it next week. But at this point, you have to think that Mike Norvell is on the hot seat.
Yeah, here's the thing. They gave Norvell, I think last season, like an 8-year extension or something like that, like something crazy. So they thought he was their guy, and like he still could be, but I don't think he's the guy that's going to be consistently having FSU competing for the ACC title every year. Like, they've started out. I think this is like the third time Norvell has started 0-3 at FSU in his like 5 or 6 years here, which is just appalling. That's terrible, and it's all being kind of looked over because of what he did last season. But that was with like a really, really, really good football team, and it took him a long time to build that team. And a lot of it was through the portal, and he tried to do the same thing this year, and he's failed miserably. So next year he will be on the hot seat. I just don't think they have the money to like buy him out yet.
Mm.
But Miami, their rival, has remained dominant in the ACC, and Louisville and Clemson are pretty much the only teams trying to keep up with them in that conference. Clemson had a massive win over NC State, and Louisville, they're 3-0, and we're going to be previewing them later today. But I'm pretty confident in saying that we're going to see Miami and Clemson in the conference championship. It's what I predicted from the preseason. These two teams won't be facing each other all season, and they have very easy schedules the rest of the way. I think the toughest teams Clemson will play is South Carolina at the end of the year. They also do face Louisville, so that'll be a great game. Miami, I think they have FSU and I don't remember who else they play, but they really have one of the easier schedules left in the country, and it's hard to see them not making the playoff at the end of the season. But yeah, that about wraps up the recap from last week.
Something that's very interesting to me is we haven't seen a ton of upsets over the last couple of weeks. There might have been one or two here or there. Michigan over USC was a pretty big one that I didn't really expect to happen.
Yeah, I forgot what the
Um,
spread was for that. I think USC was -4 because I bet on that game to USC to win that, and USC was up by 4 points. Funnily enough, in the end of that game, but they just Michigan marched down the field on the ground and had a rushing touchdown with like a minute left to go.
hmm
Yeah,
And then Oregon State beat Purdue. That was a. I don't think anybody expected that.
yeah, it was
I mean, Purdue wasn't. They're not expected to be in the top of the Big Ten, but I don't think Oregon State, is that good right now either. Considering the fact that they just lost Jonathan Smith to Michigan State.
right.
But the biggest thing to me over the last couple of weeks has been everybody's been worried about Oregon, right? And the way
Yeah,
that they've been playing. I was a little worried myself, but it boosted my confidence a little bit to see that since then, since all three teams have played against Oregon, they are all 8-0 combined outside of those games.
so they've had a pretty quality schedule, I
They've
guess, up
had a
until
pretty
this point.
they've had a pretty quality schedule. Boise State, I mean, they're looking good. Oregon State obviously just beat Purdue. Uh, Idaho, they had a big game against Wyoming, who they beat. That's an FCS team or FBS, whatever. So I mean that's pretty big right there. But yeah, that pretty much sums it up for the recap over the last couple of weeks. Like you said, I didn't have a lot of notes to talk about for the recap. Um, Moving forward, we'll probably end up doing a weekly show. Um, so that way we have a lot more to talk about in the recaps and stuff. Game versus game type of stuff. Big games of the week, whatever. But yeah, so moving on to our next topic for today, the Pac-12. Over the last couple of weeks, they've added some teams. They went out and got Boise State, San Diego State, Fresno State, Colorado State. Today, there were some reports that they were getting Gonzaga,
Hmm.
which has proven, well, it's not finalized yet. More to come on that on PhantomSportsIndustries.com. There's also rumors that Utah State is going to be joining the Pac-12.
Yep.
So uh, I know today Tulane and a couple of other schools
Yeah,
backed
they're
out.
looking to add Memphis, Tulane, UTSA, and South Florida, all teams from the AAC.
Yeah, and there was four ACC teams that uh,
AAC.
AAC, sorry. There was four teams that committed to the AAC. I'm trying to pull it up.
Yeah, they released a joint statement reaffirming their commitment to the
Mm.
conference, I think, yesterday. Um, the Pac-12, here's the important thing. The Pac-12 has to have 8 members before the 2026 season in order to meet the NCAA's minimum requirement to be recognized as a conference.
hmm
And Utah is the other school expected to join the Pac-12, which would put them at 7 total teams. I think they will be able to find one more. So I'm not a huge Pac-12 fan, but I do want to see it kept alive.
hmm
And things are moving really slowly though because the Pac-12 doesn't have a new TV deal yet, and that's the main reason those AAC teams were scared away. The stability of that conference and the TV deal and all that is just like it's convinced South Florida and Memphis, Tulane, UTSA to just not really move.
hmm
Which sucks because I think Memphis, Tulane, and South Florida specifically, those 3 teams would be really, really quality additions to the Pac-12. Like all these teams, Boise State, Fresno State are 2 other really good teams. It's gonna take time. Like it'll take several years for these teams to like actually be Power 5 level schools. But I think when you look at Boise State and USF, like if they were to actually get into the Power 5, you could see those teams, like I could really see those teams turning into like perennial winners.
hmm
So I hope the Pac-12 is able to form an 8-team conference at the very least, and I really hope one of those teams from the AAC makes the move, especially South Florida, because they have a lot of stuff brewing over there.
Yeah, and let's talk about the Mountain West and where they can go. I mean,
Right.
we've seen the Pac-12 take several of their teams, and I released an article on Phantom Sports Industries a while back, talking about a couple of teams that they could bring up from the FCS. Um,
Hmm.
there's obviously Idaho. Who
Yeah.
played well against Oregon earlier this year. You can't credit them out. Trying to pull it up. Um,
NDSU maybe.
NDSU, that would be another good one, as well as South Dakota State. If you bring up
Yeah.
one, you're going to have to bring up the other because of the rivalry that those two have, and they're always perennial powerhouses together. I mean, since 2010, NDSU they've won a remarkable 129 games and 9 FCS championships.
Dominant.
South Dakota State has been right behind them with 103 games over the last 10 years and 2 championships to show for it. So those two teams have just been dominating uh, the FCS year in and year out. But then you could also go out and get teams like Montana and Montana State, who this is where I think if you're gonna pick one, you're not gonna miss the other.
Right.
These are two of the most successful programs in the FCS history. Each of them has appeared in a national title game in the last 3 years. They're consistently ranking at the top of attendance and did so again last season. And geographically, they fit the Mountain West.
Right.
So, I mean, those are the five teams that I think the Mountain West could go out and get right now if they just want to call up teams from the FCS and groom them
Yeah.
into big G5 schools, and especially with Tulane, UTSA, USF, and Memphis committing to the AAC. Those are teams that the Mountain West also can't go out and get now
Right.
with that happening. So,
And they're in a
um,
similar predicament with the Pac-12. They both have 7 teams. So as I said,
mhm.
you have to have at least 8 to keep the thing alive. So hopefully both of them are able to find new teams.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll happen.
Me too.
I mean, I know a lot of officials in the Pac-12, so I hope that conference stays alive. Either way, the teams will still be there. Whether they fall and join another conference or what, and those officials will be reassigned. But I just with how much history the Pac-12 has, and me being a Pacific Northwest guy, I do hope that it stays. It sucks seeing Oregon, leave, but I think, in the end of the day, that move is going to prove beneficial to Oregon because they're now equipped better to go out and get guys, in the southern parts of the United States or the eastern parts of the United States. They have more of a brand now that they're part of the Big Ten.
Midwest too.
Yeah, exactly. So, um, yeah, I think the Pac-12 will survive. Who they add, I'm not quite sure yet, but it's good to see. Um, it's good to see that they've already gone out and gotten some teams. I know
Yeah.
earlier today the Mountain West did come out and say that they were trying to persuade those 4 teams to come back. Um, but whether that happens, I don't know. So it'll be interesting to see.
Agreed. Let's move on to what's next for the top 10 teams this next weekend. This weekend, excuse me. We're gonna start with your Oregon Ducks.
Hmm.
Of number 8 Oregon traveling to UCLA. Bruins just had a pretty solid game in Death Valley against LSU, but they fell pretty short. You have a good feeling about that game coming in?
I do. I mean, the past 3 games, Oregon hasn't looked the greatest, but they've had a week to kind of rejuvenate, refresh,
Were they on
get.
bye?
They were on by this week,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So they've had some time to really prepare for this game, but it would be true Oregon fashion to look past UCLA at
Totally.
Ohio State and go, we're gonna walk into this game and just dominate and Oregon falls. I hope that doesn't happen because if it does, that pretty much sums up Oregon's season.
Yeah.
As you know, at least their CFP um, odds, but especially with the way that UCLA has looked this year. I mean, they've looked absolutely horrendous without Chip Kelly. So Oregon, I, I I think with what we saw in that Oregon State game, I think they've figured out how to use Dylan Gabriel, and I think the offensive line was finally showing some strides.
Hmm.
So it'll be interesting to see if they can build off that. I think they will, and I think they'll win this game pretty handily, just like they did it against Oregon State.
Yeah, I forgot that when I was watching the UCLA game the other day, that they had Eric Bieniemy as offensive coordinator from the Chiefs,
Mm.
and their offense was moving the ball pretty well down the field against LSU, but they kind of sputtered out towards the end of the game. But yeah, they're a team that's not to be overlooked, like you said. And moving on to a game that I think is low key one of the best on the slate, Arizona at number 10 Utah. Arizona's going to come in there with a chance to upset Utah, who's got their backs against the wall. No Cam Rising. They won last game against Oklahoma State, so they've proven they can win big against good teams without them. But Arizona State is a different type of animal offensively, um, and I think that's going to be a really, really tough test for Utah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a tough test for Utah as well. I mean, there's I haven't seen a lot of Utah football this year, but Arizona is not a team to look, past. I mean, they lost Jed Fish, but they still have
Their
their
offense,
quarterback.
oh yeah, their whole offense remained. They got Noah Fafita and I think their wide receiver's name is McMillan. His last name is McMillan,
Hmm.
but he's gonna be a top 15 pick coming into the draft next year. So their offense is just explosive, and it'll be fun to see them go up against probably the best defense in the Big 12. So that'll be a really cool clash. Um, moving on to the Big Ten, we have number 19 Illinois, somehow number 19. They're sitting at 4-0, traveling to Nittany, Happy Valley to face Penn State, number
Mm.
9. Um, I'm not really too high on either of these teams because Drew Aller doesn't really excite me too much. And frankly, I don't know that much about Illinois. I know they play great defense, and their offense looks to have improved a lot coming into this season. But I would still take Penn State to it's kind of like a get right game in my opinion for Penn State. Help them get back on track, and it'll definitely like pad their resume as they get more deeper into the season.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about either of the teams either. Um, I will say I think Penn State is probably going to be one of the top teams in the Big Ten this year, alongside Oregon and Ohio State. So I agree with what you're saying. I think Penn State is going to kind of use this as a get right game,
Yeah,
and take down Illinois.
yeah.
Um,
Illinois, they were like ranked 24 or 25 coming into last game, and they got a really big win in overtime at Nebraska. And I did
mhm.
watch a little bit of that game, so I was kind of like looking at Nebraska as like a team that could make a pretty Cinderella type of run this year, but that fizzled out pretty quickly. And I'm looking at the stats now. Their Illinois quarterback Luke Altmaier had 4 touchdowns on 21 passes, so yeah, they look efficient, and hey, they don't look too bad. So I really don't have any type of prediction or lean for that game, but I'll be keeping my eyes on it for sure. Moving on to another Big Ten team, Ohio State, ranked 3, traveling to Michigan State. And Michigan State, they've been struggling a bit this year. Forgot who they got upset by early in the season, but I think they've recovered a bit since then. And now, yeah, they did not recover. They lost to Boston College last weekend,
Hmm.
so they're sitting at 3-1. Um, I'm trying to remember. Yes, early in the season they lost to my hometown school. They barely beat my hometown school, FAU, 16-10. And then the next week they barely beat Michigan State 27-20. They barely beat Maryland 27-24. They got a big 40-0 win over Prairie View. I don't know where the hell that's located. And then they lost to Boston College. Their offense is pretty pitiful, and I think Ohio State is just they're gonna whip their ass. Moving
Yeah, I mean,
on. Yep. Go ahead.
I could see it.
Hmm. Yeah,
I,
and
I,
Ohio
I
State, they didn't look too great last weekend either. So this is gonna be, Ohio State's gonna give them the business. I think,
Mhm.
as kind of a means to like make up for last week's performance.
I think that Jonathan Smith is going to be okay at Michigan State.
Yeah, I do
It's
too.
just going to take him a couple of years to finally, get his guys there, and then he might be able to build something with or Michigan State. But with all of the stuff that happened with Michigan State over the last couple of years,
Yeah.
he's got to right the rights there at that in that program.
Yeah. And I was gonna mention I thought they would make a pretty quick turnaround because of their quarterback Aiden Childs, who I liked
Hmm.
coming into the season, but he's been abysmal. And he had 3 interceptions and no touchdowns against Boston College
Mm.
through under 50% completion. So I think it just starts by sorting whatever that situation is out. Is Aiden Childs going to remain there, or are they going to find a new guy to replace him? If they do, and he's a lot better, I think Michigan. They're 3-1 regardless, even though he has been playing pretty bad. Um, but it's not going to be a great season for the Spartans. They got a tough schedule ahead, and I think it'll take him a couple of years to get things going. Moving on to the SEC, we got Kentucky traveling to rank 6 Ole Miss. Kentucky gave Georgia the scare of all scares last weekend, but they kind of just played like sissies at the end. They
Hmm.
punted on Georgia's side of the field, and I feel like this is a common theme for Mike Stoops. He's like a guy that really just wants to keep the games close against elite teams just because it looks good, but he never really goes for the kill. And Kentucky, they're always a bit dangerous. They have a really, really good rushing offense this year, just like they did last season, and their defense is hard-nosed and very physical. But Ole Miss, I think, is just going to cream them. They have maybe the best offense in the country right now, and they haven't really skipped a beat since last season.
Yeah, Ole Miss looks good. I think Kentucky looked pretty good against Georgia, and I'll talk more about Georgia in that loss or that win over Kentucky, I should say. Um, Here when we talk about Georgia, but Ole Miss, yeah, they haven't skipped a beat. Lane Kiffin is just doing amazing things with that program. Uh, with what he did this last year in the um, transfer portal and his recruiting, I think it goes to show that he's here to win no matter what happens,
Mm-hmm. Completely
no matter
agree.
who he's facing.
I'm absolutely praying every night that he somehow travels to Florida, but week by week, that Ole Miss, like, not the job looks better, but just the situation at Ole Miss every single week looks so much better than Florida.
Hmm.
Like, as a Gator fan, I think it would be insane for Lane Kiffin to leave that situation for Florida. But I don't know. I keep seeing rumors that it might happen, so I'm holding out hope. Moving on to the last game of the top tens that I'm going to mention. Number 2 Georgia heading to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, to face the Crimson Tide, who are ranked 4 in the nation. Game day is going to be there. This is going to be an incredible game, hopefully. Um, Georgia and Bama obviously have so much history, like in the last 6 or 7 years. And man, this is going to be a really tough game because we saw Georgia nearly lose to a Kentucky team, a bad Kentucky team, on the road. And now they got to face Alabama. So we'll see if they're going to trip up twice or if Georgia's going to get they're going to look like the Georgia team we know.
Yeah, this big rivalry game in Tuscaloosa will tell us where each team is this year. Alabama has looked good under first-year head coach Kalen DeBoer. Georgia, they've looked young this season.
Yeah.
And I've talked with a Georgia fan from college, and he said the same thing. He said this team just looks young, which they are young. They have, correct me if I'm wrong, but Carson Beck is their quarterback, right?
Yep.
And he's what, a sophomore, junior?
I think he's a junior now. He
Junior
didn't
now.
play his freshman year. This is I think his second year starting.
Okay, yeah. So he's a junior, but he's inexperienced. He's got maybe 1 year under his belt, but outside of him, this team just doesn't have a lot of experience. They've lost a lot over the last couple of years to the draft, to the transfer portal, whatever it may be. Kirby Smart has got to figure out a way to build this program if he wants to make it to the CFP this year. He's got to figure out a way to get the most out of his guys. But I think next year this Georgia team is going to be more experienced. Carson Beck, if he comes back, I think it'll be a lot better for them. But this year, they just look young.
Yeah. Beck, I think, is going to be heading to the draft after this season. He's going to chase that money. But the Georgia, I completely agree with you that they lost so much to the NFL. On their offensive line, I think that's where they took a pretty big hit. Things have been so perfect for Carson Beck, like ever since he stepped foot on the field to be their starter. And I think right now he's experiencing like some adversity for the first time in his career because the O-line isn't perfect, the receivers aren't very experienced, and now it's kind of up to him to carry this team for a couple of games. You're not going to be able to cruise through every opponent like they did the last couple of seasons. So we'll see if Beck is going to be able to rise to the occasion against Alabama.
Yeah, I agree. So does that do it, or do we have any more teams that we want to talk about? Anything else?
That's all I got for this weekend.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Tailgate Discussions podcast. Thanks for joining us. Make sure to join the show next week. Make sure to watch our game of the week this coming weekend as well. We'll see you next weekend.
See ya.